In the silence of St. Chrysostom's Cathedral, as mourners gathered to bid farewell to a beloved child, no one expected what happened next. Thalia Nightshade, once dedicated to saving lives across war-torn countries, now stood before the altar, her voice trembling with rage as she challenged God himself. What unfolded in the next 7 days would shake the foundations of Misthollow Vale and change not just Thalia's life, but the lives of everyone who witnessed her desperate cry for answers. This is a story about loss, redemption, and the mysterious ways faith finds those who have lost all hope. If this story touches your heart, make sure to subscribe and join our community of storytellers. Your support helps us share more inspiring tales of hope and transformation. The autumn wind whispered through the ancient oak trees surrounding Misthollow Vale, their leaves painting the sky in shades of amber and crimson. St. Chrysostom's Cathedral stood like a silent guardian, its weathered stone walls reaching toward heaven as if in eternal prayer. Inside, the air hung heavy with the scent of lilies and the weight of unspoken grief. Thalia Nightshade sat in the last pew, her fingers tracing the worn wood grain beneath her hands. She hadn't planned to attend another funeral, not after everything she'd seen in her years as a humanitarian aid worker, not after holding too many dying children in her arms across too many war-torn countries. Yet here she was, watching as people filed in to mourn 8-year-old Emily Silverwood, daughter of her closest friend, Vesper. Father Kieran Thorne stood at the altar, his silver hair catching the light that filtered through the stained glass windows. His presence usually brought comfort to the faithful of Misthollow Vale, but today, something else lingered in the air, a tension that seemed to pulse with each toll of the church bells. Lysander Vale, the church's groundskeeper, moved silently between the shadows of the pillars, lighting candles with practiced grace. His dark eyes met Thalia's for a moment, and she saw something there. Recognition, perhaps, of the storm brewing within her. "We gather today," Father Kieran began, his voice resonating through the cathedral, "to celebrate the life of Emily Silverwood, a bright soul called too soon to God's embrace." Thalia's hands clenched into fists. Too soon. The words echoed in her mind like a mockery. She watched as Vesper Silverwood collapsed into quiet sobs in the front pew, her shoulders shaking with the weight of a mother's grief. The memories flooded back. The children she couldn't save in Sudan, the families torn apart in Syria, the countless faces that haunted her dreams. And now Emily, who had died not in some distant war zone, but here in peaceful Misthollow Vale, taken by an illness that showed no mercy. Sister Adara Frost, sensing the growing tension, moved closer to where Thalia sat. But before she could reach her, Thalia rose, her movement sharp and sudden as a thunderclap. "Stop!" Thalia's voice cut through the solemn atmosphere. "Just stop." Father Kieran paused, his eyes meeting hers with gentle concern. "Thalia, my child." "Don't," she said, stepping into the aisle. "Don't talk about God's embrace or his plan or his mercy. Where was his mercy when Emily begged for one more day? Where was his plan when Vesper prayed night after night for a miracle?" The cathedral fell silent, save for the distant echo of wind against the ancient windows. Lysander stopped his work with the candles, his shadow frozen against the wall like a dark sentinel. "I've seen too much death," Thalia continued, her voice rising. "I've watched too many children die while people prayed to a God who never answered. And now you stand there telling us this is part of some divine plan?" She walked toward the altar, her steps echoing against the stone floor. "If God exists, let him face me now. Let him explain why he takes children from mothers who love them. Let him justify the suffering I've witnessed. Let him prove that all this faith, all these prayers aren't just echoes in an empty universe." Dr. Soren Winterbrook, who had treated Emily until the end, rose halfway from his seat, concern etched on his face. But Lysander moved first, stepping from the shadows with a grace that seemed almost supernatural. "Ms. Nightshade," he said softly, but Thalia wasn't finished. "No, I challenge him. Here, now, in his own house. Show us you're real. Show us you're not just a story we tell ourselves to make the darkness less frightening. Show us..." A sudden gust of wind burst through the cathedral, extinguishing every candle Lysander had lit. The stained glass windows seemed to vibrate with an unseen energy, casting strange, shifting patterns across the gathered mourners. Father Kieran stood calmly at the altar, his eyes filled with a mixture of compassion and something else, something that made Thalia's next words die in her throat. "Some challenges," he said quietly, "are answered in ways we least expect. Stay with us, Thalia. Stay 7 days. If you still want answers after that, I promise you'll have them." The wind died as suddenly as it had come, leaving the cathedral in profound silence. Thalia stood frozen, feeling the weight of every eye upon her. But it was Vesper's gaze that finally broke her. Her friend's tear-stained face held no judgment, only a deep, knowing pain that mirrored her own. As Lysander began relighting the candles one by one, their flames seemed to burn with an unusual intensity, casting long shadows that danced across the cathedral walls. And in that moment, something shifted in Misthollow Vale, something that would set in motion events none of them could have predicted. The funeral continued, but everyone present knew that this was just the beginning. In challenging God, Thalia Nightshade had unknowingly opened a door that couldn't be closed, a door that would lead her through 7 days that would change everything. The evening after Emily's funeral, Misthollow Vale was shrouded in an unusual mist that crept through the narrow streets like ghostly fingers. The old lampposts cast haloed circles of light through the fog, creating an otherworldly atmosphere that matched Thalia's turbulent state of mind. She stood at the window of her rented room above Meridian Starling's antique bookshop, watching as the last mourners made their way home through the gathering dusk. The events at the cathedral played over and over in her mind: her outburst, the strange wind, Father Kieran's enigmatic challenge. 7 days. The words echoed in her thoughts like a bell toll. A knock at her door startled her from her reverie. When she opened it, she found Lysander Vale standing there, his tall frame nearly filling the doorway. In his hands, he held a wooden box with intricate carvings that seemed to shift in the dim light. "Father Kieran asked me to bring you this," he said, his voice carrying the same quiet intensity she'd noticed in the cathedral. "He thought you might want to understand more about Emily's last days." Thalia hesitated before taking the box. "I don't need more stories about miraculous visions or peaceful passings," she said, but her voice lacked its earlier fire. Lysander's dark eyes studied her face. "No stories," he replied, "just truth. Emily left these for her mother, but Vesper thought you should see them first." Inside the box, Thalia found drawings, dozens of them. Emily's artwork created during her final weeks in the hospital. As she spread them across her small table, her breath caught in her throat. The images were unlike anything she'd expect from an 8-year-old girl facing death. Vibrant mandalas spiraled across pages, their patterns so complex they seemed impossible for a child's hand to create. Scenes of gardens she'd never seen, filled with flowers that didn't exist in any botanical guide. And faces. Countless faces of people Thalia recognized from her own past. Children she'd tried to save in refugee camps. Mothers she'd comforted in war zones. Faces she'd never told anyone about. "How?" she whispered, her fingers trembling as they traced a portrait of a Syrian boy she'd held as he died 3 years ago. How could she know these faces? Lysander moved to stand beside her, his presence oddly comforting in the growing darkness. "Emily spoke of visitors in her final weeks," he said carefully. Dr. Winterbrook attributed it to the medication, but she described them in detail. People from all over the world who would sit with her, share their stories. Thalia felt a chill run down her spine. That's impossible. These people, most of them are dead. Are they? Lysander's question hung in the air like the mist outside. Death isn't always what we think it is, Ms. Nightshade. Sometimes it's a door, not a wall. A sudden gust of wind rattled the window, making Thalia jump. When she turned back to question Lysander further, he was already at the door, his silhouette barely visible in the dim light. "Join us for morning prayers tomorrow," he said. "Not for God's sake, but for yours. There are things about Misthollow Vale you need to understand." After he left, Thalia sat among Emily's drawings until well past midnight, her mind racing. She thought of the countless times she'd pronounced God absent in the face of suffering, Yet here were images that defied explanation. Memories pulled from her own heart by a dying child she'd barely known. As the clock struck midnight, she heard singing from the direction of St. Chrysostom's. The sound drifted through the mist, an ancient hymn that seemed to carry centuries of hope and sorrow in its melody. Despite herself, Thalia found her feet carrying her to the window again. In the square below, she saw Sister Adara Frost walking with a group of children, their small lanterns bobbing like fireflies in the fog. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. They were heading toward the cathedral, their voices rising in harmony with the distant singing. "The Midnight Children's Choir," came Meridian Starling's voice from her doorway, making Thalia start. The shopkeeper stood there with 2 steaming mugs of tea, her silver hair gleaming in the lamplight. Emily used to lead them, you know. Even in her final weeks, she would sing from her hospital bed. And somehow, the children here could hear her. Thalia accepted the offered tea, its warmth seeping into her cold hands. "You don't really expect me to believe that." Meridian smiled, the wrinkles around her eyes deepening. "Belief isn't something we expect, dear. It's something we experience." Emily understood that better than most adults. That's why she left those drawings. She knew you'd need them. Need them for what? To remember that there are more things in heaven and earth than your pain will let you see. Meridian moved to the window, watching the children disappear into the cathedral. 7 days isn't a challenge, Thalia. It's a gift. Time enough to learn what Emily knew, what Father Kieran knows, what Lysander protects. "And what's that?" Thalia asked, though something in her didn't want to hear the answer. Meridian turned to her, her eyes reflecting the lamplight like ancient stars. "That God doesn't avoid suffering. He weeps with us in it." Emily's drawings aren't just pictures. They're windows. The question is, are you brave enough to look through them? With those words, Meridian left, leaving Thalia alone with the drawings, the distant singing, and questions that seemed to multiply with each passing hour. As she finally lay down to sleep, the faces in Emily's artwork seemed to watch over her, their eyes holding secrets she wasn't sure she was ready to understand. The first day of her 7-day challenge was ending, but Thalia sensed it was merely the beginning of something far more profound than her angry words in the cathedral could have anticipated. In the darkness of her room, one of Emily's drawings, a spiral of light emerging from shadows, seemed to glow with its own inner luminescence, promising revelations that would shake the very foundations of her disbelief. The morning after her unsettling discovery of Emily's drawings brought no clarity to Thalia Nightshade. She woke before sunrise, her dreams filled with the faces from the artwork, each one a memory of loss she'd tried to bury. The Midnight Children's Choir had long since fallen silent, but their echoes seemed to linger in the misty air of Misthollow Vale. Making her way down the creaking stairs of Meridian's bookshop, Thalia found herself drawn to St. Chrysostom's Cathedral. The morning bells were ringing, their deep tones reverberating through the empty streets. As she approached the massive wooden doors, they opened silently, as if expecting her. "I wondered if you'd come," Father Kieran's voice echoed from the shadows. He stood near the altar, arranging fresh flowers in crystal vases. The early morning light streaming through the stained glass windows painted his silver hair in hues of azure and gold. "I'm not here for prayers," Thalia said, her voice firm despite her inner turmoil. "I want answers about Emily's drawings." Father Kieran smiled gently. "Of course you do. But first, I think there's someone you should meet." He gestured toward the side chapel, where a small figure knelt in prayer. As Thalia approached, she recognized the woman as Isolde Blackbriar, the town's eldest resident. The ancient woman's hands were clasped around a rosary that seemed to glow with an inner light. "Isolde," Father Kieran called softly. "She's here." The old woman turned, and Thalia felt her breath catch. Isolde's eyes were completely white, yet they seemed to see right through her. "Ah, the one who challenges heaven," she said, her voice surprisingly strong. "I've been waiting for you since Emily told me you would come." "Emily told you?" Thalia felt her skepticism rising again. "When?" Time moves differently for those near the Vale, Isolde replied, rising with unexpected grace. Emily visited me often in her final days, though her body never left the hospital. She showed me your face, told me of your pain, of the children you couldn't save. Thalia took an involuntary step backward. That's impossible. You couldn't have known. About the boy in Aleppo? Isolde interrupted. The one with the red ball who died in your arms? Or perhaps the twins in Sudan, who sang until the very end? She reached out and took Thalia's trembling hand. Emily knew them all. They came to her, you see. The lost ones always find their way to Misthollow Vale. Father Kieran moved quietly around them, lighting incense that filled the air with sweet smoke. There are places in this world, Thalia, where the boundary between what we call life and death becomes permeable. Misthollow Vale is one such place. Emily understood this naturally, as children often do. Thalia wanted to pull away, to dismiss their words as superstition, but Isolde's grip was surprisingly strong. Show her, the old woman commanded, though whether she was speaking to Father Kieran or someone unseen, Thalia couldn't tell. Suddenly, the cathedral filled with a strange, shimmering light. The incense smoke began to take shape, forming figures that danced at the edge of vision. Thalia heard whispers, fragments of conversations in languages from every corner of the world where she'd worked. "Stop this," she demanded, her voice shaking. "Whatever trick this is, no tricks." Lysander's voice came from behind her. He emerged from the shadows like a spirit himself, carrying Emily's wooden box of drawings. "Only truth. The same truth Emily tried to share with you through her art." He opened the box, and the drawings seemed to rise of their own accord, floating in the air around them. Each one began to glow with an inner light, and Thalia watched in stunned silence as the images began to move, like living windows into other worlds. Emily had a gift, Father Kieran explained softly. She could see the threads that connect all souls, living and past. In her final days, she used that gift to create bridges. Bridges for those who needed to heal, to understand, to find peace. Isolde's white eyes seemed to reflect the moving images. She knew your heart was heavy with the weight of all those you couldn't save. She wanted you to know that they found their way home, that their stories didn't end in pain. The images swirled faster now, and Thalia saw them. All the faces from her past, no longer frozen in moments of suffering, but alive with light and peace. The Syrian boy with the red ball was laughing, playing in gardens that couldn't exist on Earth. The twins from Sudan were singing, their voices somehow audible in the swirling lights. "This isn't possible," Thalia whispered, but her voice lacked conviction. Tears streamed down her face as she watched the scenes unfold. "You challenged God to show himself," Lysander said, moving to stand beside her. "But God doesn't always speak in thunder and lightning. Sometimes he speaks through the art of a dying child, through the visions of a blind woman, through the memories we carry in our hearts." The lights began to fade, the images settling back into their paper forms. But something had changed in the cathedral's atmosphere. The air itself seemed charged with possibility, with a presence that Thalia couldn't explain away. "3 more signs will come," Isolde proclaimed, releasing Thalia's hand at last. "Look for them in the places where your pain runs deepest." Emily marked the way. She turned her blank eyes toward the altar. "It's beginning." As if in response, all the candles in the cathedral flickered at once, and through the stained glass windows, Thalia saw the sun break through the morning mist, painting the world in colors that seemed too vivid to be real. She left the cathedral in a daze, Emily's drawings safely back in their box under her arm. But as she walked through the awakening town, she couldn't shake the feeling that she had stepped through some invisible doorway, into a world where her certainties no longer held true. The 3rd day of her challenge had begun, and with it, the walls she had built around her heart began to show their first cracks. The sun hung high over Misthollow Vale, as Thalia paced the worn floorboards of her room above the bookshop. Emily's drawings lay scattered across her bed, their images now seeming to shift and change when she wasn't looking directly at them. The morning's events in the cathedral had left her shaken, questioning everything she'd built her life upon. A soft knock interrupted her thoughts. "Come in," she called, expecting Meridian with her usual offering of tea. Instead, Cyrus Emberlight, the young assistant to Dr. Winterbrook, stood in her doorway, his face pale with urgency. "Ms. Nightshade," he said, slightly out of breath. "Doctor, Winterbrook needs to see you. It's about Emily's last medical records." Thalia followed Cyrus through the winding streets to the town's small medical clinic, a Victorian building with ivy-covered walls. Inside, Dr. Soren Winterbrook sat at his desk, surrounded by open files and x-rays that seemed to glow with an unusual luminescence. "Thank you for coming, Thalia," the doctor said, gesturing to a chair. His usually steady hands trembled slightly as he pulled out a specific file. "I've been reviewing Emily's case and I've found something I can't explain." He spread several x-rays across his desk. "These were taken the day before Emily died. Look at the patterns in her brain scan." Thalia leaned forward, her medical training from her humanitarian work allowing her to understand what she was seeing. The scan showed intricate patterns of neural activity, forming shapes that seemed familiar. "Now look at this," Dr. Winterbrook said, placing one of Emily's drawings next to the scan. The patterns matched perfectly, the same swirling designs, the same interconnected lines. "That's not possible," Thalia whispered. "She couldn't have seen her own brain scans. These were taken after she drew this." Dr. Winterbrook nodded gravely. "Exactly, but there's more." He pulled out a series of recordings. "We monitored her brain activity in her final hours. Listen." The recording began to play, filling the room with a strange rhythmic beeping. As they listened, Thalia realized with growing amazement that the pattern matched the melody of the Midnight Children's Choir she'd heard the night before. Her neural activity was creating music, Dr. Winterbrook explained, his scientific certainty battling with wonder. And not just any music, hymns and songs she'd never heard, in languages she couldn't have known. Cyrus stepped forward, adding his own observation. "I was there that night. The machines. They shouldn't have been able to make those sounds. It was like her mind was broadcasting on frequencies that shouldn't exist." Thalia sat back, her hands gripping the arms of her chair. "Why are you showing me this?" "Because," Dr. Winterbrook said, leaning forward, "you're not the first person to challenge God in Misthollow Vale. 20 years ago, I did the same thing. I was a young doctor then, convinced that science could explain everything. But then I started working here, started seeing things that defied all medical explanation." He pulled out another file, this one old and worn. "Isolde Blackbriar's medical history. Did you know she was born with functioning eyes? She lost her sight in an accident 40 years ago. But the damage wasn't just to her eyes. Her entire occipital lobe, the part of the brain that processes vision, was destroyed." "Then how does she see?" Thalia asked, though part of her didn't want to know the answer. "That's just it. She shouldn't be able to. But brain scans show activity in areas that shouldn't exist, patterns that match exactly with what we saw in Emily's scans." He shuffled through more papers. "And she's not the only one. Lysander Vale's medical file shows similar anomalies. It's like their brains have found new pathways, ones that our science can't explain." A sudden gust of wind blew through the clinic, scattering papers and causing the lights to flicker. In that moment, one of Emily's drawings floated off the desk, landing at Thalia's feet. It showed a detailed diagram of a human brain, but with pathways and connections that no medical textbook had ever documented. "Emily knew," Cyrus said softly. "She tried to show us what she could see, the connections between all living things, the patterns that bind everything together." Dr. Winterbrook gathered his papers with trembling hands. "I'm showing you this, Thalia, because you deserve to know that your challenge isn't just being answered with faith, it's being answered with evidence. Evidence that suggests there are forces at work in Misthollow Vale that transcend our understanding of reality." Thalia picked up the drawing of the brain, studying its impossible patterns. "What happened to Emily in the end?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. In her final moments, Dr. Winterbrook said, his voice thick with emotion. Every medical device in her room began to play music. The brain activity monitors showed patterns we'd never seen before. And she smiled. Thalia. She smiled and said, "They're all here now. Everyone you couldn't save. They've come to show you the way home." The words hit Thalia like a physical blow. She remembered Emily's face at church, how the girl had always watched her with knowing eyes, even as the illness took its toll. As she left the clinic, the late afternoon sun cast long shadows across Misthollow Vale. But for the first time, those shadows seemed less like darkness and more like doorways. Doorways to understanding something vast and mysterious that she was only beginning to glimpse. The fourth day was ending, and with it another piece of Thalia's carefully constructed wall of skepticism had begun to crumble, replaced by questions that no amount of scientific reasoning could answer. The fifth day dawned with a heavy fog that clung to Misthollow Vale like a shroud. Thalia woke to find her room filled with an otherworldly blue light, the kind that seems to exist somewhere between night and day. The medical files from Dr. Winterbrook lay open on her desk, their contents still defying her attempts at rational explanation. A movement caught her eye. One of Emily's drawings had somehow migrated to her window, appearing to pulse gently in the strange morning light. As she reached for it, a sound drifted through her open window, a child's laughter, hauntingly familiar. Without thinking, Thalia rushed downstairs and out into the misty streets. The laughter came again, echoing off the ancient buildings of Misthollow Vale. She followed it, her feet carrying her toward the old cemetery behind St. Chrysostom's Cathedral. "You shouldn't be here," Sister Adara's voice cut through the fog. The nun stood by the cemetery gates, her black habit making her seem like part of the mist itself. Not yet. The morning hours belonged to them. "Them?" Thalia asked, though something in her already knew the answer. "The ones who walk between," Sister Adara replied, her eyes fixed on something Thalia couldn't see. "Emily's friends, the lost ones. They gather here in the twilight hours." As if in response, the laughter came again, multiplied now, a chorus of young voices that seemed to dance on the edge of hearing. Through the fog, Thalia could see shapes moving among the headstones, children's silhouettes that weren't quite solid, weren't quite real. "This is impossible," Thalia whispered, but her voice lacked conviction. "Is it?" Lysander appeared beside them, his dark form materializing from the mist. "You've seen Emily's drawings. You've heard Dr. Winterbrook's evidence. Why do you still cling to what's possible and what isn't?" Before Thalia could respond, one of the shapes in the cemetery became clearer, a small boy holding a red ball. Her heart stopped. She knew that face, had held its earthly counterpart as he died in Aleppo. "Ahmed," she breathed, the name catching in her throat. The boy smiled, and suddenly the fog around him cleared. He looked just as she remembered, but whole now, unmarked by war and suffering. He bounced his red ball once, the sound impossibly clear in the morning air. "He's been waiting to thank you," Sister Adara said softly. "They all have." More figures emerged from the mist, the twins from Sudan, their voices raised in the same song they'd sung in their final moments. A young girl from Gaza who had died holding Thalia's hand, a baby from Honduras whose mother had begged Thalia to save him. "Stop this," Thalia pleaded, backing away. "These are just hallucinations, the fog, the strange light. The truth doesn't become less true because we refuse to believe it," Lysander said, his voice gentle but firm. Emily understood that. She saw them all, drew their stories, created bridges between their world and ours. Ahmed bounced his ball again, and this time it rolled toward Thalia, stopping at her feet. When she picked it up, it felt real, warm and solid, marked with the same scuff she remembered from that terrible day in Aleppo. "How?" she asked, her voice breaking. "Misthollow Vale sits at a crossing point," Sister Adara explained. Emily called it the thin place, where the veil between worlds stretches like gossamer. She could see through it naturally. Others, like Isolde, learned to see through different means, and some, like these children, found their way here because they had unfinished business with the living. The twins stepped forward, their forms becoming more solid. They reached for Thalia's hands, and she felt their touch, cool like morning dew, but undeniably real. "We never blamed you," they said in unison, their voices carrying the same musical lilt she remembered. "None of us did. You were there with us at the end. You helped us find our way here." Tears streamed down Thalia's face as more of the children approached. Each one had a word, a touch, a smile to share. They surrounded her with the love and forgiveness she had never been able to give herself. "Emily knew you needed this," Lysander said, watching as the scene unfolded. "She knew your heart carried the weight of all these souls. That's why she drew them, why she created a path for them to reach you." Ahmed spoke then, his voice exactly as she remembered it. "You held me until I wasn't scared anymore. And then I found Emily, and she showed me the way home." The sun was rising higher now, burning away the fog. The children's forms began to fade, but their presence lingered in the warmth of the air, in the gentle breeze that carried the scent of flowers that shouldn't bloom in autumn. "They'll be back," Sister Adara assured her. "They're always here, just beyond the veil." Emily made sure of that. She created doorways of sorts, places where those who need healing can find their way to peace. Thalia looked down at the red ball in her hands, only to find it had transformed into one of Emily's drawings, a perfect rendering of this moment, completed weeks before it happened. As she walked back through the cemetery gates, the morning light now fully asserting itself, Thalia felt something shift inside her. The weight she had carried for so long felt lighter, transformed by the touch of those she had thought lost forever. The fifth day had brought her face to face with miracles she couldn't deny, with a reality that expanded far beyond the boundaries of what she had believed possible. And somewhere, in the space between grief and understanding, she felt the first real stirrings of something she had thought forever lost: hope. As the sixth day dawned in Misthollow Vale, storm clouds gathered on the horizon, dark and heavy with promise. Thalia sat in Meridian's bookshop, surrounded by ancient texts the shopkeeper had quietly placed before her. Books about thin places, about the boundaries between worlds, about children who could see beyond the veil. "The storm's coming," Meridian observed, looking up from her ledger. "The biggest one we've had since Emily's passing." Thunder rolled in the distance, and the shop's lights flickered ominously. The morning's encounter in the cemetery had left Thalia raw, her carefully constructed worldview crumbling like autumn leaves in a gale. "You're expecting something, aren't you?" Thalia asked, noting how Meridian kept glancing at the cathedral through the shop window. Before the shopkeeper could answer, the shop's bell chimed. Father Kieran entered, his silver hair damp from the first drops of rain. "It's time," he said simply. "Emily showed me this day in one of her last drawings." Thalia followed them through the strengthening storm to St. Chrysostom's. Inside, she found the cathedral transformed. Hundreds of candles burned despite the howling wind that somehow made its way inside, their flames dancing but never extinguishing. Lysander stood at the altar, arranging Emily's drawings in a complex pattern that seemed to pulse with its own inner light. "What is this?" Thalia asked, her voice nearly drowned by another crash of thunder. "Emily's final gift," Sister Adara answered, emerging from the shadows. She knew this storm would come. She drew it, down to the last lightning bolt. As if in response, lightning illuminated the cathedral's stained glass windows, casting prismatic shadows across the floor. In that moment, Thalia saw that the shadows matched the pattern of Emily's drawings perfectly. "Today, the veil will be thinner than ever," Isolde Blackbriar announced, her blind eyes reflecting the candlelight like mirrors. "Emily prepared the way, but you, Thalia Nightshade, must choose to see." The storm intensified, rain pounding against the ancient stones like a drummer's frenzied rhythm. The cathedral's doors burst open, admitting a wind that should have extinguished every candle, but instead made them burn brighter. "Look," Lysander commanded, pointing to the drawings on the altar. The artwork began to move, not like the gentle animations Thalia had seen before, but with a fierce energy that matched the storm's intensity. Colors swirled off the pages, forming shapes in the air, doors that opened onto impossible vistas, windows into worlds beyond understanding. Through one, Thalia saw Ahmed playing in gardens of light. Through another, the twins sang with a choir of stars. Each drawing became a portal, showing her the reality that Emily had seen. The truth that death was not an end but a transformation. "Why?" Thalia asked, her voice breaking. "Why show me all this?" "Because," Father Kieran said gently, "your challenge to God wasn't really about belief. It was about pain. The pain of thinking you had failed them, that their suffering was meaningless, that their stories ended in darkness." Lightning struck the cathedral's spire, and in that brilliant moment, every drawing in the room erupted with light. The faces of all the children Thalia had lost appeared around her, not as ghosts or memories, but as living beings of pure radiance. "We had to show you," Emily's voice rang out, clear as a bell despite the storm's fury. The girl stood in the center of the cathedral, not as she had been in her illness, but whole and radiant. "You needed to know that everyone you tried to save found their way home, that your love helped guide them here." Thalia fell to her knees, overwhelmed by the presence of so much light, so much love. The storm raged outside, but within the cathedral, a deeper power held sway. "All those nights you prayed for answers," Emily continued, approaching Thalia with a smile that contained universes. "All those times you thought God was silent, He was there, working through your hands, your heart, your love for us. Every child you held, every life you touched, became a thread in a tapestry you couldn't see until now." The other children joined Emily, forming a circle of light around Thalia. Ahmed bounced his red ball, which left trails of starlight in the air. The twins hummed a melody that seemed to make the very stones of the cathedral vibrate with joy. "You challenged God to prove His existence," Father Kieran said softly, "but God was proving Himself through you all along. Through every act of love, every moment of compassion, every tear you shed for those you couldn't save." The storm reached its crescendo, and with it, the light from Emily's drawings grew blindingly bright. In that moment, Thalia saw everything. The interconnected web of lives and loves, the patterns that bound all souls together, the greater purpose that wove through even the darkest moments of her life. "Do you understand now?" Emily asked, taking Thalia's hand. Her touch felt like sunlight breaking through clouds, and Thalia did understand. She saw how every life she had touched, every death she had witnessed, was part of a greater pattern, a pattern of love and redemption that transcended human understanding. She saw that her pain had been transformed into purpose, her losses into bridges between worlds. As the storm began to subside, the visions slowly faded, but their truth remained. Emily's drawings settled back onto the altar, now filled with a subtle luminescence that hadn't been there before. The children's presences withdrew like a receding tide, leaving behind a peace that felt both ancient and new. The sixth day had brought Thalia face to face with the divine, not in thunder and lightning, but in the quiet miracle of love that persisted beyond death, in the profound truth that nothing, no life, no love, no act of compassion, was ever truly lost. The seventh day in Misthollow Vale arrived with a stillness that seemed to hold its breath. The storm had passed, leaving behind a world washed clean, where every color seemed more vivid, every sound more clear. Thalia stood at her window watching the sun rise over St. Chrysostom's Cathedral, its spire still bearing the mark of lightning, a spiral pattern that exactly matched one of Emily's final drawings. The events of the previous night had left her transformed. The weight of years of guilt and doubt had been lifted, replaced by an understanding that defied rational explanation, but resonated with absolute truth in her heart. A knock at her door revealed Lysander, his usual mysterious demeanor now carrying a sense of anticipation. "It's time for the last revelation," he said softly. "Father Kieran is waiting." As they walked through the morning-fresh streets, Thalia noticed how different Misthollow Vale looked now. Every stone, every tree, every shadow seemed to pulse with hidden meaning. Children played in the square, their laughter carrying echoes of the otherworldly choir she had witnessed. "You see it now, don't you?" Lysander asked. "The thin places, the doorways between worlds?" Thalia nodded. It's like having a veil lifted from my eyes. How did I never notice before? Sometimes we have to be broken open before we can truly see, he replied. Emily understood that. It's why she chose you. They entered the cathedral to find it transformed once again. All of Emily's drawings had been arranged in a spiral on the floor, leading to the altar where Father Kieran stood with Vesper Silverwood, Emily's mother. Thalia, Vesper called out, her voice strong despite the tears in her eyes. Emily left something for you. She made me promise to give it to you on this day, at this exact hour. From a small velvet bag, Vesper withdrew a single sheet of paper, Emily's final drawing. Unlike the others, this one was blank except for a single sentence written in a child's careful hand. The answer was always love. As Thalia held the paper, words began to appear, flowing across the surface like water. She recognized them. Every prayer she had ever whispered over a dying child, every word of comfort she had offered, every silent plea for help she had made in her darkest moments. Emily could see them all, Vesper explained, her voice gentle. Every prayer, every act of love. She saw how they created bridges between worlds, how they wove together to form something greater than ourselves. But why me? Thalia asked, watching as more words appeared on the paper. Why did she choose to show me all this? Father Kieran stepped forward, his eyes bright with understanding. Because you needed to know that your challenge wasn't just to God, it was to yourself. You needed to see that every moment you thought you had failed, every life you couldn't save, was actually a thread in a tapestry of love that extends beyond death itself. Suddenly, the cathedral filled with a warm, golden light. The drawings on the floor began to glow, and from them rose the figures of children, not just the ones Thalia had known, but thousands more, all connected by threads of light that wove between them like a cosmic web. Look closely, Isolde's voice rang out as she emerged from the shadows. See what Emily saw. And Thalia did see. In each thread of light she saw stories, millions of them all interconnected. She saw how every act of compassion, every moment of love, created ripples that extended far beyond the physical world. She saw how the children she had lost had found their way to others who needed guidance, how their stories had become part of a greater narrative of hope and healing. Your challenge was never about proving God's existence, Sister Adara said, joining them at the altar. It was about understanding that love itself is the proof, love that persists beyond death, love that builds bridges between worlds, love that transforms even our deepest pain into purpose. Emily's final drawing began to glow in Thalia's hands, and suddenly she heard the girl's voice, clear as morning bells. Now you understand. Every tear you shed, every hand you held, every heart you touched, it all matters. It all becomes part of the light. The children's figures began to fade, but the threads of light remained, pulsing with life and purpose. Thalia could see now how they connected everything, the living and the dead, the seen and unseen, the physical and the spiritual. What happens now? She asked, looking at Father Kieran. He smiled gently. That depends on you. Emily showed you the doorways, but only you can choose how to use them. Vesper stepped forward, taking Thalia's hands in hers. Stay, she said simply. Help others see what Emily showed you. Help them understand that their love, their pain, their prayers, none of it is wasted. Thalia looked around the cathedral at the faces of those who had guided her through these 7 extraordinary days. She thought of all the children she had yet to meet, all the souls who needed to know what she now knew. Yes, she whispered, and as she spoke, the threads of light seemed to pulse brighter. Yes, I'll stay. The 7th day was ending, but Thalia knew it was really just a beginning. Her challenge to God had been answered, not with thunder and miracles, but with something far more profound. The revelation that love itself was the miracle, the bridge between worlds, the answer to every question she had ever asked. As the sun set on Misthollow Vale, casting long shadows through the cathedral windows, Thalia finally understood what Emily had known all along, that in the end, it was never about believing or not believing. It was about seeing the light that connects all things and choosing to become part of that light yourself. The story that had begun with an angry challenge at a funeral had transformed into something else entirely, a testament to the power of love to bridge all gaps, heal all wounds, and light the way home for lost souls on both sides of the veil. The weeks following Thalia's transformation brought changes to Misthollow Vale that no one could have predicted. The morning after her 7th day of revelation dawned bright and clear, but something was different about the quality of light that filtered through the town's ancient streets. People spoke of seeing colors that had no names, of hearing music in the whisper of leaves. Thalia had taken up residence in a small cottage near St. Chrysostom's, its windows overlooking the cemetery where she had first encountered the children's spirits. Each morning, she would wake to find new visitors waiting in her garden, not just the local townspeople, but travelers who had been drawn to Misthollow Vale by dreams they couldn't explain. "They're coming because the veil is thinner now," Lysander explained one morning as they watched a group of grieving parents walk through the cathedral gates. "What Emily started, what you helped complete, it's changing things." Thalia nodded, understanding now how Emily's gift had created lasting doorways between worlds. She had begun keeping her own journal, documenting the stories of those who came seeking answers, seeking comfort, seeking connection with those they had lost. "There's someone here to see you," Sister Adara announced, approaching them with a young woman who clutched a familiar wooden box. She found one of Emily's drawings in a hospital in London. The woman, who introduced herself as Marina, opened the box with trembling hands. Inside was a drawing that made Thalia's breath catch. It showed Marina herself, sitting in this very garden, surrounded by the spirits of children she had lost. "How is this possible?" Marina whispered. "This drawing, it's dated months ago, before I even knew this place existed." Emily saw all the threads, Thalia explained gently, leading Marina to a bench beneath an ancient oak tree. She drew maps for those who would need them, created pathways for healing that would unfold long after she was gone. As they sat together, the air around them began to shimmer in a now familiar way. The children appeared gradually, 3 small figures that Marina recognized immediately, her tears falling freely as they approached. "My babies," she breathed, reaching out with trembling hands. Thalia watched as the reunion unfolded, seeing how the threads of light that Emily had revealed now connected Marina to her children, healing wounds that had seemed unhealable. This was her new purpose, not just to witness these moments, but to help others understand them, to guide them through their own journeys of discovery and healing. Later that afternoon, Father Kieran found Thalia in the cathedral, arranging fresh flowers on the altar. "You're settling into your role well," he observed with a gentle smile. "I never thought I'd find peace here," Thalia admitted, touching one of Emily's drawings that now hung permanently near the altar. "Let alone help others find it too." "That's often how grace works," he replied. "We find healing by helping others heal." Emily understood that. It's why she left so many breadcrumbs for others to follow. The cathedral doors opened, admitting Dr. Winterbrook with a stack of files under his arm. His face bore the excited expression that had become familiar in recent weeks. "You need to see this," he said, spreading the papers across a pew. "I've been monitoring the energy patterns around the town. They're changing, growing stronger. It's like Emily's presence created a template, and now others are learning to access these frequencies naturally." Thalia studied the graphs and charts, recognizing patterns that matched Emily's drawings. "The children who visit, they're leaving traces, aren't they? Creating their own doorways?" "Exactly," Dr. Winterbrook confirmed. "Each connection, each moment of healing strengthens the overall pattern. It's like watching a garden grow, but instead of plants, we're seeing the growth of something beyond our normal understanding of reality." As if to confirm his words, the afternoon light suddenly shifted, streaming through the stained glass windows in impossible colors. The air filled with the sound of children's laughter, distant but clear. Meridian appeared in the doorway, her silver hair catching the strange light, More visitors, she announced. A group from a children's hospital in Syria. They say they were led here by dreams of a girl who drew pictures of their futures. Thalia felt her heart expand with understanding. This was Emily's true legacy, not just the drawings she had left behind, but the seeds of healing she had planted in hearts across the world. Each person who found their way to Misthollow Vale became part of an expanding web of light and understanding. "We should prepare," Lysander said, emerging from the shadows. "The thin places are growing thinner. More will come seeking answers, seeking connection." As they made preparations for the new arrivals, Thalia reflected on how far she had come from that angry woman who had challenged God at a funeral. She understood now that her challenge had been answered in the most perfect way possible, not with grand gestures or divine proclamations, but with the quiet miracle of love that persisted beyond death, beyond doubt, beyond all human understanding. The afternoon sun continued its impossible dance through the cathedral windows, painting the world in colors that Emily had seen all along. In the garden outside, Marina sat with her children's spirits, their reunion watched over by ancient trees that seemed to whisper secrets to those who had learned to listen. Misthollow Vale had become more than just a town. It was a sanctuary, a crossing point between worlds, a place where healing could begin. And Thalia, once lost in her own grief and anger, had found her true calling as a guide for others who needed to find their way home. The 8th chapter of her story was unfolding, but like the patterns in Emily's drawings, it was connected to all that had come before and all that would follow, an endless tapestry of love, loss, and redemption that stretched beyond the boundaries of life and death themselves. The transformation of Misthollow Vale continued with each passing day, its ancient streets now humming with an energy that visitors could feel the moment they crossed the town limits. Autumn had deepened, painting the world in rich golds and crimsons. But amidst the falling leaves, spots of impossible spring flowers bloomed, Emily's drawings coming to life in unexpected ways. Thalia stood in her cottage garden early one morning, watching as Sister Adara led a group of new arrivals toward the cathedral. Among them was a woman whose face seemed hauntingly familiar, though Thalia was certain they had never met. "Her name is Raven Winters," Lysander said, appearing beside her with his usual silent grace. "She's a war photographer. Like you, she's carried the weight of too many lost souls." The woman paused at the garden gate, her eyes meeting Thalia's with immediate recognition. "I know you," she said softly. "I saw you in my dreams. A child was drawing your picture, telling me you would understand." Thalia felt a familiar warmth in her chest, Emily's presence still guiding, still connecting those who needed healing. "Come in," she said, opening the gate. "There's something you need to see." Inside the cottage, Emily's drawings covered the walls, each one glowing softly in the morning light. Raven moved from image to image, her photographer's eye taking in every detail. She stopped at one that showed a battlefield in Somalia, a scene she had photographed years ago. "How?" she whispered. "I never published this, I couldn't. It was too painful," Thalia finished. "Because of the children." Raven nodded, tears streaming down her face. "I tried to help them, but I was too late. All I could do was document their last moments. I've never forgiven myself for not doing more." "Watch," Thalia said gently, touching the drawing. The image began to move, showing what happened after Raven had lowered her camera. The children's spirits rose from their broken bodies, guided by familiar figures: Ahmed, the twins, and dozens of others who had found their way to Misthollow Vale. "They were never alone," Thalia explained. "Every soul you witnessed in those moments of transition was met, guided, loved. Your presence there mattered more than you knew." Dr. Winterbrook burst in, his usual calm demeanor replaced by urgent excitement. "Thalia, you need to come to the clinic. Something's happening with the readings." They rushed to the small medical building, where the doctor's instruments were registering unprecedented levels of energy. The patterns on his screens matched perfectly with Emily's drawings, creating a mandala of light and data that pulsed with life. "It's like the veil isn't just thinning anymore," he explained, adjusting his equipment. Transforming the boundaries between worlds are becoming more fluid, but in a controlled way, like Emily designed it, Lysander finished. She saw this coming. All her drawings. They weren't just pictures, they were blueprints. Father Kieran arrived, bringing with him an elderly man who leaned heavily on a wooden cane. "This is Professor James Blackwood," he introduced. "He's been studying thin places around the world for decades." The professor's eyes sparkled with barely contained excitement as he surveyed the clinic's readings. "In all my years of research, I've never seen anything like this. It's as if someone has created a permanent bridge between worlds, but with safeguards, with purpose." "Emily," Thalia said simply. She understood things we're only beginning to grasp. Suddenly, all the electronic equipment in the clinic began to hum in harmony. The sound grew, becoming a familiar melody, the Midnight Children's Choir, but somehow more complex, more complete. Through the clinic windows, they could see people gathering in the streets, drawn by the music. The air itself seemed to shimmer with possibilities. In the town square, children played games with partners only some could see. At the cathedral, prayers were being answered in ways that defied explanation, but felt absolutely right. "Look at this," Professor Blackwood said, pointing to his own instruments. "The energy patterns, they're not just random, they're creating a language, a way of communicating between worlds that anyone can learn to understand." Raven, who had followed them to the clinic, pulled out her camera with trembling hands. Through the lens, she could see what her naked eye had missed, threads of light connecting everyone in Misthollow Vale, living and dead, seen and unseen. Emily knew, Thalia realized aloud. She knew we would need proof, evidence that even the most skeptical minds couldn't deny. She left us not just a way to heal, but a way to understand. The day continued to unfold with new revelations. More visitors arrived, each carrying their own stories of loss, their own needs for healing. But now, instead of just witnessing the miracles of Misthollow Vale, they were becoming part of them, learning to see and interact with the thin places in their own ways. As evening approached, Thalia stood in her garden again, watching as Raven photographed the sunset. The images on her camera's screen showed not just the physical beauty of the moment, but the spiritual reality that now seemed as natural as breathing. The presence of loved ones gone before, the connections that death could not sever. "I understand now," Raven said, lowering her camera. "Why Emily led me here. It's not just about healing our own pain. It's about helping others see what's always been there." Thalia nodded, thinking of her own journey from skeptic to guide. The 9th chapter of their story was unfolding, revealing new depths to Emily's gift with each passing day. Misthollow Vale had become more than a sanctuary. It was a school, a laboratory, a proving ground for truths that would eventually change how the whole world understood the boundaries between life and death. As night fell, the Midnight Children's Choir began their song, but now other voices joined them, the voices of the living, learning to sing in harmony with those beyond the veil. The music rose over Misthollow Vale, carrying with it the promise of healing, of understanding, of a future where love truly conquered all boundaries, even death itself. The 10th day since Thalia's transformation dawned with an unexpected visitor to Misthollow Vale. Dr. Elena Brightmore, a renowned physicist from Cambridge University, arrived unannounced at St. Chrysostom's Cathedral, clutching one of Emily's drawings that had somehow found its way into a scientific journal. "These patterns," she explained to Thalia, spreading the drawing across a pew, "they're identical to quantum entanglement models we've been studying. But this child drew them months before our research was even published." Thalia watched as Dr. Winterbrook and Professor Blackwood joined them, their excitement palpable as they compared Emily's artwork with scientific data. The drawing seemed to pulse with its own inner light, revealing layers of complexity that even the scientists hadn't yet discovered. "It's more than just quantum physics," Dr. Brightmore continued, her voice filled with wonder. "These patterns suggest the existence of what we might call consciousness bridges, connections that transcend conventional space-time." As if in response to her words, the cathedral filled with a familiar shimmer. The children appeared, not as vague spirits this time, but as clearly visible presences that even the skeptical physicist couldn't deny. Ahmed bounced his red ball, which left traces of quantum probability patterns in the air. "Impossible," Dr. Brightmore whispered, her scientific certainty crumbling as she watched the twins dance through patterns that perfectly matched her most advanced theoretical models. Emily understood these connections instinctively, Father Kieran explained, joining them with a stack of previously unseen drawings. She wasn't just depicting the spiritual realm, she was mapping the actual mechanics of how consciousness persists beyond physical death. Lysander emerged from the shadows, carrying the wooden box that had started it all. "There's more," he said, revealing a final set of drawings that Emily had left sealed until this precise moment. "She knew you would come, Doctor. Brightmore, these are for you." The new drawings showed complex mathematical equations interwoven with images of children playing across dimensional boundaries. Each formula, when checked against Dr. Brightmore's own research, proved to be not just accurate, but revolutionary. "This changes everything," the physicist breathed, her hands trembling as she examined the drawings. "The implications for our understanding of consciousness, of reality itself." Raven, who had been photographing the scene, suddenly called out in surprise. Her camera had captured something extraordinary. The quantum patterns from Emily's drawings were visible in every photo, connecting all living things in a web of light that defied conventional physics. As the day progressed, more scientists arrived, drawn by Dr. Brightmore's urgent calls. Each brought their own expertise, and each found in Emily's drawings answers to questions they'd been pursuing for years. The cathedral became a curious blend of laboratory and spiritual sanctuary, where the boundaries between science and faith dissolved in the face of undeniable truth. "Look at this," Professor Blackwood exclaimed, pointing to a pattern forming in the air above the altar. The children's presence had created a visible manifestation of quantum entanglement, a bridge between worlds that could be measured and documented. Thalia watched as the scientists worked, their instruments recording what the faithful had always known in their hearts. Emily had left them not just a spiritual legacy, but a scientific roadmap to understanding the deeper nature of reality. Dr. Winterbrook's clinic became a hub of research activity, its simple medical equipment now augmented by sophisticated sensors that mapped the increasing connections between worlds. The readings showed what Emily had drawn, a growing network of consciousness that transcended death itself. She wasn't just a child who could see spirits, Thalia realized aloud. She was a messenger, bringing understanding that could bridge the gap between science and spirit. As evening approached, Dr. Brightmore gathered her fellow scientists in the cathedral garden. The air was thick with energy as she presented their preliminary findings. "What we're witnessing here is nothing less than a revolution in our understanding of consciousness," she announced. "Emily's drawings have given us a framework for understanding how awareness persists beyond physical death." The children appeared again, this time creating complex quantum patterns in the air that the scientists' instruments could record and measure. The twins sang their ethereal song, and the frequencies matched exactly with the theoretical models Dr. Brightmore had developed. "But it's more than just scientific validation," Thalia added, watching as grieving visitors continued to arrive, drawn by their own connections to the growing web of consciousness. "Emily showed us how to heal, how to maintain bonds of love across the boundary of death itself." Professor Blackwood nodded, his instruments recording yet another surge of energy as more spirits became visible in the growing dusk. Science and spirit, mind and heart. Emily understood that they're all part of the same reality. Her gift was showing us how to see the connections that were always there. As night fell over Misthollow Vale, the cathedral bells rang out across the town. The sound seemed to ripple through multiple dimensions, visible now to everyone present as waves of light and energy. The Midnight Children's Choir began their song, and this time, the scientists' equipment captured every frequency, every harmonic that connected their world with the next. The 10th day had brought validation of a different kind, proof that even the most rigorous scientific minds could not deny. Emily's legacy had expanded beyond comfort and healing, to include understanding that would eventually reshape humanity's view of life, death, and consciousness itself. In her cottage that night, Thalia added new pages to her journal, recording how science and spirit had merged in ways she never could have imagined during her initial angry challenge to God. The truth, she now understood, was greater than either pure faith or pure reason could encompass. It required both, just as Emily had shown them. The quantum patterns continued to dance in the night air, visible now to anyone who had learned to see them. They told a story of connection, of persistence, of love that transcended all boundaries, even those between life and death, between science and faith, between what was known and what was possible. The transformation of Misthollow Vale had become complete. What had begun with one child's extraordinary vision had blossomed into something that neither science nor faith alone could fully explain. The 11th morning since Thalia's transformation dawned with an ethereal quality, as if the world itself had learned to exist in multiple dimensions simultaneously. News of the scientific discoveries had spread, drawing not just researchers and grieving families, but religious leaders from every faith tradition. They came seeking understanding of what Emily had revealed, the tangible evidence of life beyond death, of consciousness that persisted, of love that transcended all boundaries. "It's remarkable," said Rabbi Sarah Cohen, who had traveled from Jerusalem after receiving one of Emily's drawings in her synagogue. The patterns she drew match perfectly with ancient Kabbalistic descriptions of the connections between worlds. Buddhist monks sat in meditation in the cathedral garden, their consciousness visibly connecting with the quantum web that Emily had mapped. Islamic scholars found in the drawings perfect representations of concepts from Sufi mysticism. Hindu priests recognized patterns that echoed their ancient texts. Thalia watched from her cottage as representatives of humanity's diverse spiritual traditions found common ground in what Emily had revealed. The children's spirits appeared to them all, transcending religious boundaries as easily as they transcended death itself. "She knew this would happen," Father Kieran said, joining Thalia at her garden gate. Emily's final drawings showed this gathering, this moment of universal understanding. Dr. Brightmore's team had set up sophisticated monitoring equipment throughout the town, recording the increasing interactions between dimensions. The readings confirmed what the spiritual leaders intuited, that all paths to understanding ultimately led to the same truth. "Look at this," Professor Blackwood called out, pointing to his instruments. The energy patterns from different religious practices all produced identical quantum signatures, matching exactly with Emily's drawings. Lysander appeared with a new set of Emily's artwork, unsealed exactly on schedule. These drawings showed the next phase, how the understanding gained in Misthollow Vale would begin to spread across the world, healing ancient divisions between faith traditions. "It's not about proving one belief system right and others wrong," Thalia realized, watching as prayers from different faiths created harmonious patterns in the quantum field. "It's about showing that all paths can lead to the same truth." Rabbi Cohen nodded, her eyes bright with understanding. "In my tradition, we speak of tikkun olam, healing the world. Perhaps this is what true healing looks like, finding unity in our diversity, understanding that all our different ways of seeking ultimately lead to the same light." The children appeared again, but this time they came with others, spirits recognized by each faith tradition, all existing together in perfect harmony. The quantum patterns swirled around them, creating mandalas of light that reflected every religious symbol simultaneously. Dr. Brightmore's team recorded everything, their instruments confirming what the spiritual leaders saw. "The mathematics are beautiful," she said, showing her calculations to a gathering of priests, rabbis, imams, and monks. All these different approaches to understanding ultimate reality. They're all describing the same underlying truth, just from different perspectives. As evening approached, something extraordinary began to happen. The prayers and chants from different traditions spontaneously harmonized, creating music that matched the frequencies of the Midnight Children's Choir. The quantum field became visible to everyone present, showing how all their different paths connected. Emily understood that truth transcends our human divisions, Father Kieran said, watching as religious leaders from traditions that had often been in conflict embraced each other with tears of joy. She showed us that the light of understanding can shine through any window we open. Thalia felt the truth of his words deep in her heart. Her own journey from angry skeptic to guide had taught her that understanding came in many forms. What Emily had given them was a way to see how all these forms connected, how every genuine search for truth led to the same destination. The children's spirits danced through the gathering, playing games that crossed all cultural boundaries. Ahmed's red ball bounced between dimensions, leaving trails of light that formed sacred geometries from every tradition. The twins sang songs that somehow contained the essence of every sacred chant. As night fell, the assembled leaders gathered in the cathedral for an unprecedented ceremony. Each brought their own traditions, their own prayers, their own understanding. But as they shared their wisdom, something miraculous occurred. The quantum field became visible to all, showing how their different practices created a single, perfect pattern, exactly as Emily had drawn it months before. "This is what she was preparing us for," Thalia said to Lysander as they watched the unified ceremony unfold. "Not just the proof of life after death, but the proof that all our different ways of understanding it are part of a greater whole." The 11th day had revealed perhaps the most profound aspect of Emily's gift, the power to unite what had long been divided, to show how diversity of belief could lead to unity of understanding. The scientific team's instruments recorded everything, providing empirical evidence of what the spiritual leaders experienced in their hearts. In her cottage that night, Thalia added another chapter to her journal, describing how Emily's vision had brought together science and spirit, reason and faith, different traditions and cultures, all in the service of a deeper truth. The quantum patterns continued to dance in the air, visible now to anyone who had learned to see them, proving that understanding could come through many paths but lead to the same light. The transformation that had begun with one child's gift had become a beacon of hope for a world often divided by different beliefs. In Misthollow Vale, those divisions had dissolved in the face of a truth too profound to be contained by any single tradition, the truth that love, understanding, and consciousness itself transcended all human boundaries. The final day in Thalia's journey dawned with a stillness that seemed to embrace all of Misthollow Vale. The morning light filtered through a world forever changed, where the boundaries between seen and unseen had become wonderfully fluid, where science and faith had found common ground in the truth that Emily had revealed. Standing in her garden, Thalia remembered the angry woman who had challenged God at a funeral, who had carried the weight of countless lost children in her heart. That woman felt like a stranger now, transformed by 12 days that had changed not just her understanding, but the world itself. "It's time," Lysander said, appearing beside her with the final set of Emily's drawings. "These are the last ones she left us." In the cathedral, Dr. Brightmore's team had set up their most sensitive equipment, while religious leaders from around the world gathered in quiet anticipation. The quantum field was visible now to everyone, showing patterns that connected all living things in a web of light and consciousness. As Thalia opened the final drawings, a gasp went through the assembled crowd. These weren't just images. They were windows into what Misthollow Vale would become, what Emily had seen all along. Each page showed how the understanding gained here would spread, how the healing would touch lives across the globe. "Look at this," Professor Blackwood exclaimed, his instruments recording unprecedented levels of quantum coherence. The children's spirits appeared, more clearly than ever before, but they weren't alone. With them came others, spirits of loved ones, reaching out to those gathered in the cathedral, proving beyond any doubt that love transcended death itself. Father Kieran stepped forward, his voice gentle but firm. "Emily's gift wasn't just for us," he said, gesturing to the drawings. "It was for everyone who has ever lost someone, everyone who has ever questioned, everyone who has ever sought to understand the deeper truths of existence." The quantum field pulsed with energy as Ahmed and the twins began their familiar play, but now everyone could see the profound purpose in their games. Each movement created patterns that matched Emily's final drawings, showing how joy and love could bridge any gap, heal any wound. Dr. Brightmore shared her final calculations, proving what the faithful had always known in their hearts, that consciousness persisted beyond physical death, that love created quantum connections that could never be broken. The scientific evidence was now as clear as the spiritual truth it validated. Thalia watched as visitors from around the world experienced their own moments of connection, their own revelations. Each person who had come seeking answers found them, not just in the remarkable phenomena they witnessed, but in the deep understanding that Emily had mapped out for them. "The work isn't finished," Lysander said, showing the final drawing, a vision of Misthollow Vale as a beacon of hope and understanding for the world. Emily knew this was just the beginning. As the day progressed, something remarkable happened. The quantum patterns began to stabilize, becoming permanent bridges between dimensions. The children's spirits could now be seen clearly by anyone who visited, their presence a testament to the reality of life beyond death. The Midnight Children's Choir gathered one final time, but now their song was joined by voices from every tradition, creating harmony that transcended cultural and religious boundaries. The music itself became visible in the quantum field, showing how all forms of praise, all expressions of love, created the same beautiful patterns. "This is what I needed to see," Thalia realized, watching as grieving parents found comfort, skeptics found evidence, and believers found confirmation of their faith. Not just proof of God's existence, but proof that love itself is the answer to every question we've ever asked. As evening fell, Father Kieran gathered everyone in the cathedral garden. The quantum field shimmered with possibilities as he spoke about Emily's legacy, not just the drawings that had brought them all together, but the truth they revealed about the nature of existence itself. "Emily showed us that death is not an ending," he said, his voice carrying to every corner of Misthollow Vale. "It's a transformation, a change in how consciousness expresses itself. And love is the force that bridges all transitions, all dimensions, all understanding." The final sunset painted the sky in colors that seemed to exist in multiple dimensions simultaneously. The children's spirits danced through the garden one last time, their joy infectious, their presence a promise that would endure. Thalia stood in her doorway, watching as visitors began their journeys home, each carrying with them a piece of the understanding that Emily had given them. She knew that Misthollow Vale would continue to be a place of healing, of discovery, of connection between worlds. The angry challenge she had made at Emily's funeral had been answered in ways she could never have imagined. God had shown himself not in thunder and lightning, but in the quiet miracle of a child's drawings, in the quantum mechanics of consciousness, in the persistence of love beyond death itself. As night fell on the 12th day, Thalia added the final entry to her journal. She wrote about transformation, about healing, about the bridge between worlds that Emily had helped them all to see. But mostly, she wrote about love. Love that transcended death. Love that connected all things. Love that had brought understanding to a world desperate for answers. The quantum patterns continued their eternal dance in the air above Misthollow Vale, visible now to anyone who had learned to see them. They told a story of connection, of persistence, of love that knew no boundaries. A story that would continue to unfold in the lives of all who came seeking answers in this remarkable place where science and spirit, doubt and faith, life and death had found their common ground in the truth of a child's vision. And in that truth, Thalia had found not just answers but purpose, helping others to see what Emily had shown them all. That love itself was the miracle they had been seeking all along. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.